Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. Today is going to be the November recap. So we only have 1 month left in the year, 31 days, and I have about 15 books left to finish, which I don't think should be too hard to do since I am actually currently reading about 15 books that I should finish by the end of the year. It's kind of embarrassing, but there's a lot of like book studies and different things that hopefully I will be able to finish it by the end of the year for my 110 book goal for 2023. But November is not a very good month. In my reading stat, I only read 7 books and 1,739 pages in the month of November. So hopefully December is way up from that and I can finish out my reading goal by the end of the year. So I had some books on here that qualify for the classics, I guess just one book, my classics for the year, and a couple that I listened to, and a new Christian fiction kids book that I'm really excited to talk about. So the first one that I want to talk about is the classic that I read, and this I saw it as I was going through, I think just like my library audio app, and I was looking for classics and this one popped up. My mom had read it last year, so I thought, why not? And that is The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. So I actually ended up giving it 3 stars, even though I have never felt so like angry as I read a book, because it's just so horrifying and so depressing as you're reading it. So basically, in a nutshell, it's the story of this guy who comes over with his fiance and her family from Lithuania. It gets really hard in Lithuania, they're out of money, and so they think, well, America is the land of dreams, why not just go there? So they end up in Chicago and basically are just victims of the lies about food and just the horrible working conditions and them being stuck in the middle of the city with no one to tell them about just the deception that is going on in the corporate America at the time. There was just not very many regulations, obviously very un-Christ-like environment, and just one bad thing after another happens. Just, you know, the fact that they don't have fresh milk, it's just like blue tinted water, and the fact that there's no sanitary living conditions, that their house is sold to them as this brand new house that is a really good deal and that they basically can rent to own, but it's actually, you know, falling apart, been lived in before, taken from every person who tried to own it, because if you don't make a payment then you're going to lose the house, and just horrible working conditions, no job unless you're like in perfect health, but yet there's just no way for you to be in perfect health. It's just this horrible cycle and so depressing as you're reading it, and so many tragedies happen. I won't spoil it if you're gonna read it, but it definitely had a big impact on me. The reason I gave it 3 stars, even though I feel like I hated it so much, was because I still think of it at least weekly after reading it, and I've talked about it to at least 4 people, just because it was written so well and showed so many horrible things, and I was reminded of so much, just like politicians trying to use people and lying, and then just the food industry and how that's a lie, and then just seeing like how they work in these factories to process the meat. And even though, yes, there has been regulations since this book has been written, I think still a lot of the same just gross things happen within those meat packing factories. And so it was just, yeah, depressing book to read. And it doesn't have any happy ending, because basically his savior at the end of the book is socialism. And it was really sad reading it, because as he starts to go to these socialist meetings, I'm thinking, oh, this seems like one of those like Salvation Army, like open air preaching type meetings, and it turned out to be socialism and basically preaching the gospel of socialism. And the author spends a long time just going and ranting about capitalism and how capitalism is actually what caused all of these problems. So I didn't like that, and just left a very depressing ending. As far as content, there is quite a bit of content in here, but not in a explicit manner, more of just, you know, that was the way that they lived in the times and how Chicago would have been in the early 1900s. So there's a lot of bars, drinking, prostitutes, there's childbirth, there's a lot of death, there's injuries, there's a brothel that gets like raided and things like that, but I don't think there was anything that was too descriptive in there. Definitely for an older teen who just wants to read about what it was like during this time period. I would recommend it if that is something that you want to learn more about, but if you don't want to be depressed about the meatpacking industry and coming over from America in the early 1900s, then maybe you should pass on this book. And then the next one I read was actually an audiobook. Oh, I forgot to say that The Jungle, I did listen to it. I just have a copy. So the next one I read is also an audiobook, The Secret Adversary, Tommy and Tuppence by Agatha Christie. This is one of her series that I haven't read before, and so I wanted to check it out. I actually just found it on the Libby app and thought it looks interesting. It actually is up there with the better of the Agatha Christie's that I read. I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's basically about 2 friends who at the beginning say, oh, we can never fall in love with each other. Yeah, sure. They decide to become private detectives. They put an ad in the paper to make a few extra pounds, and they soon get wrapped up in this whole political mystery that started during World War I, maybe? I think it takes place in between the wars. And they get hired to find this missing person who has this important document. So there's a lot of double agents, there's kidnapping, and there's so much more like fun, good old mystery stuff. There are just a couple of deaths, but it doesn't revolve around a murder, which is a problem I have with a lot of Agatha Christie's, that can get a little bit dark and too much violence in there. This one just felt like some kind of like mystery movie you would watch. So there is one murder in here that is by like, I think it's cyanide or something similar to that. And there might have been another death and a little bit of romance, but it was a sweet romance by the end. And then, I know this one doesn't really count as a book, but I did spend time reading it, and it covers just all the other things that I've been reading that I can't count as books. So the Joshua LSP Scripture Study Guide, I marked was it 1 Peter, I think I read that, or 1 Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude. This is the 3rd one I've used of these, and I really enjoy these books because it has the text on one side and then you can take notes over on the other side, and there's just plenty of room to make notes in the text. So I think this is a great way to study your Bible, or I use it for our church Bible studies that we have, and I really enjoy just the amount of room that they give to make notes, and also at the end there's extra lines to make notes, and also at the beginning. So if you are doing some personal Bible study that's like in depth into one book, or you have a sermon series or a class at your church that goes through a book of the Bible, I would definitely recommend using those books. At first I thought, I would just take notes in my notebook, but I have really enjoyed using those. And then I listened to The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is not my typical book because it is one of the popular mystery and thriller books that actually won the Goodreads Award in 2018 for that category, but I ended up enjoying it. So I will just read the synopsis from Goodreads because I don't want to spoil anything, but it says, Evelyn Hardcastle will be murdered at 11 p.m. There are 8 days and 8 witnesses for you to inhabit. We will only let you escape once you tell us the name of the killer. Understood? Then let's begin. Evelyn Hardcastle will die every day until Aidan Bishop can identify her killer and break the cycle. But every time the day begins again, Aidan wakes up in the body of a different guest, and some of his hosts are more helpful than others. So it's really hard to get your mind around this book. It's a very interesting concept, I think. So he wakes up every day as someone else, but he's reliving the same day. And so by the end of it, you have 8 Aidan Bishops all working together, kind of, and as the new ones come, they're affecting the past of the one that already lived. It's really confusing. But by the end of the book, I think that they do give a good explanation for it, and it doesn't seem like it's magic. Like, I think it could actually happen. I know that doesn't seem like it based on the synopsis, but the way that they explain it and the reasoning behind it actually is really interesting. And even though this book was really long, I did enjoy reading through it, and I felt like I definitely couldn't figure out what was happening until the end and figure out the mystery. I did love the themes of forgiveness at the end, but there is quite a lot of violence in here. So that's why I only ended up giving it 3 stars, because there was a lot of things I liked, but then there was a lot of things that I didn't like. Essentially, I did like the concept of the plot, and I think maybe it could have been a little bit shorter and with less violence, because there's specifically one character that shows up and there's just a lot of blood, so I didn't like that. For content, I would give it 3 out of 5, with 0 being no content and 5 being like extreme content. There are mentions of a rapist, lots of killing, sometimes with a lot of description in there. A man does wake up in bed next to a woman, and there is some mild language. But as far as a secular book, I don't think it was terrible and would be semi-clean, I guess. Okay, and the next one is yet another audiobook, The Trumpet of the Swan by E.B. White. We listened to this as a family and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Listen, this book is not going to be some intellectual, wonderful book that you're going to love and learn so many lessons from. This is E.B. White, who is really obsessed with humans and animals interacting together and animals acting like humans, which I think is kind of weird. So it was quite possibly the silliest book I've ever read, which does make it fun to read as a family, and the kids will enjoy it. So if you're into the story of a swan that's born without a voice, who can't possibly ever find love without his voice, so he learns to read and write, but his family can't read and write, so nothing happens. So then his dad breaks into a music store to steal a trumpet for him, so he learns trumpet, gets multiple jobs for friends humans, and saves about $4,000 so that his dad can repay the store that he stole the trumpet from. Then this is a story for you. That sounds ridiculous? Maybe don't read it. If you're kind of weirded out by animals that have conscious thought, who interact with humans and get married, then only read this for comedic purposes, like I did. But overall, it made for some good entertainment, and like the old books that were written in the 1970s, it's clean and actually good for your children to read. Okay, and then the last one I read this month was one I actually read in print. I was reading a lot of other books throughout the month, but then I stopped to read this one, and so I didn't finish them, and yeah. So this is the only book that I ended up finishing in print this month. This is Nova by Chuck Black. It is book 1 of the Star-Lore legacy. I believe that there are 5 books so far, and he's planning on writing more. They're coming out very quickly. So I did not know that Chuck Black had written other books. If you've seen my videos, I've talked a lot about the Kingdom series and the Knights of Erythrae, and I figured out that he had written this new sci-fi series. So I sent him a message and asked if he would send one to me in exchange for a review, and he did. But you guys know that I am very honest with my reviews, and so whenever people offer to send me things or I ask, I make sure that it's a book that I actually will have a good chance of liking. I'm scared to do any kind of partnership with a book that I might not like, just because I would feel bad bashing the book. But obviously I would always be honest in my reviews. So I actually did end up giving this one 5 stars. Chuck Black is just as good as I remember, guys. He is well worth your money. This one is sci-fi that's clean, Christian allegory. It really reminds me of Star Wars meets like Christianity. So kind of like along the lines of Han Solo, but also like just Luke Skywalker, like being this poor kid who gets raised up to kind of save the people. It's good, and I think you should read it, especially if you like sci-fi. And there's a huge problem with like no sci-fi being clean, and this one actually is, so I would highly recommend it to you. So there's a lot of description of like the technology in there, but I don't think it was boring. It was more made you think that he really understood what he was talking about and spent a lot of time developing this world and all the technology that goes with it. So basically the story is Dason Lockridge. He was born of royal blood, and he's in this academy with his cousin who's the prince. And then there's this poor girl who all of a sudden gets pulled into their life, and he becomes a friendship with her, and then he just learns all of these things that the government has been lying, and that he's actually not who we thought he was. And it was just really interesting, well written, kept you reading. There's just a really sweet scene between the 2 main characters, and I think he did a really good job of showing a romance without so much as even a kiss. It was really good. So if you like sci-fi, I would highly recommend reading this. It is allegorical, and it's really fun to try to figure out what allegory it is, so I'm not gonna spoil that for you. But whenever you're reading allegorical books, my recommendation is that you don't try to think too hard about it, because then you might end up finding like a lot of bad theology because you're trying to equate everything to the Bible, but there's a lot in here that's just his world building, and it's not a one-for-one. So I like to think of it as the main character is kind of inspired by a person in the Bible, but then this is its own story, and it's really good just on its own. So after saying that I read 7 books last month, I apparently forgot about an entire book and didn't even talk about it. So the last book that I read was Spark a Match by Jen Turano. This is book 2 in the Matchmakers series. I don't remember when I read book 1, but it was just a fun lighthearted book that I really enjoyed. So I was excited when the second book came out and I listened to it. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I think that it was just a really enjoyable book. This one had a little bit of mystery to it. I'm looking at Lindsay from Books for Christian Girls. She always writes really thorough reviews, so if you're ever looking for a very detailed like content review, go check out her blog in Goodreads. There's definitely love in here, but I wouldn't say that there was a lot. I think there was maybe like just a couple of kisses. I don't really remember a lot, and there wasn't a ton of like noticing, which, you know, is a big pet peeve I have in these Christian fiction books. So I think it was just like fun. You get to see them kind of go through society, but also he's kind of undercover agent, and so you get to see that side. And then their friends are always funny. Like Jen Tranter writes books that have a lot of like comedic relief in them. So I enjoyed this, and if you're looking for just a funny like kind of rom-com, this is a fun book to read. So I hope you guys enjoyed the reviews for the 7 books that I read this month and that you got some good recommendations. As always, if you want to buy these books, there are links down below in the description, and by buying through those links, that does help me just a little bit. There's also links below to my social media and my Etsy shop if you want to check that out. So also just one more note, if you like this t-shirt, I got it from Conviction Co, and I do have a discount code for you guys that you can get 10% off of any of their clothes, and they're all conservative Christian shirts that say just fun things on them. So if you guys want to check that out, I'll leave that in the description below. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you back here next week. Bye!